this tutorial, I'll share some techniques on playing acoustic guitar parts with our Renegade Acoustic Guitar, and I hope you'll find them useful. We'll start out with some playing techniques that are more general that you could use with any guitar library, and then we'll move on to things that are more specific to Renegade Acoustic. This video will cover picking and finger picking parts. We'll cover the strumming features in another video. For a backing acoustic guitar part, you're going to play arpeggios for the most part. You can create a respectable track by simply playing chords, one note at a time, starting with the lowest note. I usually play the lowest note with my left hand and the rest of the chord with my right, but that's just easiest for me. Two things to keep in mind. First, it's a good idea to use the correct guitar chord voicings, at least to start out with. We've got a guitar chord voicing PDF that you can download on our support page. Number two, you don't have to play every note in the chord. You can leave some of the lower notes out if it's sounding muddy. You can go up and back down again. This works well for 6/8 time. Mix up the order of the notes. Now try adding a second and alternating that with the third. So in the case of D major, the second would be an E. When I say second, third, fourth, fifth, I'm referring to the note of the scale. In D, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now this works with the minor as well. And of course you can suspend the fourth. Another technique is to use pedal tones. A pedal tone refers to a note that stays the same even though the rest of the chord is changing. Let's take the chords G, C, and D. Normally you'd have this. Now I'll keep the G on the bottom and change only the high notes. Now I'll keep a high G while changing the lower notes. Let's do G, E minor, A minor, and D. So I didn't even play the F sharp in the D chord, but you still get the idea of a D chord. It doesn't have to be all arpeggios. Throw in some single notes as well. You don't have to arpeggiate at all. Let's switch to fingerpicking. When fingerpicking, you can play a little more polyphonically since the fingers can pick more than one note at a time. Now this brings up an interesting question. Do I need to worry about if a live guitar player could actually play the part I'm writing? My take on this is that if you're not going to replace the part using a live player, then no, don't worry about it. It just has to sound like a guitar player could actually play it. Not only that, but one of the quickest ways to make a guitar player grumpy is to ask them to reproduce a part you played on a keyboard. Many of our customers are actually guitar players, and they use our libraries when they're a little out of practice, or they don't want to put new strings on their guitar, or the baby's sleeping, whatever. And we take that as a huge compliment. Something I've always done is to picture the player in my mind as I'm playing, whether it's a violinist, an oboe player, a guitarist, whoever it is you're trying to emulate, just picture them as you play, how they move, the expression on their face. It might sound silly, but it works for me. Okay, let's look at some of the things you can do with Renegade Acoustic Guitar. If you've watched the walkthrough video, you know how this works. Whatever articulation I choose here will play at higher key velocities, and these will play at lower velocities, and you can adjust the thresholds here. Anything in the middle is just sustains. You can also use key switches to override the velocity settings. So if I hit a key switch for a trill, you'll hear a trill no matter what the key velocity is. Let's start with Hammer-Ons because you'll probably use them the most often. So I can play normally, and when I hit a note harder, I hear the hammer-on. The hammer-ons, the pull-offs, and the trills are tempo synced, so if you need to adjust them, hit the More Settings button. The articulations play intervals that are dependent on the key you've selected. If you're in the wrong key, things are not going to sound right. You can also set these for all semitones. Right now, we're in D major. The hammer-ons, pull-offs, and upslides work like this. The note you play is the end note, or the target note. So, if you play a harder note to trigger a hammer-on, in this case an E, you will hear the grace note, then the hammered-on note, which is the E. Same thing with a pull-off. The grace note happens first, and then you end up on the E. Again, the grace notes you hear depend on what key you've chosen with the master key knob. I just used a key switch to trigger the pull-off since our high-velocity articulation is set to hammer-on. When you use a key switch for a hammer-on or a pull-off, you can play them at lower velocities. And at lower velocities, you get short slides instead of the quicker hammer-ons or pull-offs. Same with the pull-offs. Hammer-ons work well when playing arpeggiated parts. You can use them on the third of the chord. The sixth. The suspended fourth. Any note, really, just experiment. Okay, pull-offs. They work well on the third as well. Now, a pull-off on the third, followed by a hammer-on the sixth. I just used a key switch for the hammer-on, so I could play softer and get the little slide. Here we have regular upslides. I like to follow a slide with a higher note, like do a slide to the third, followed by a sustained note on the fifth. You only want to slide on the first note. Or follow the slide with the sixth higher. Move it up a few steps. The downslide is a quick slide down from the note you play. Follow it with a lower note. The up trill works well on the third. It also works when you're working your way down a scale. The down trill also sounds good when followed by a higher note. I'm going to switch over to the key of G major. Here's the simple up bend. Again, playing the third works well. And this is the up and down, or the momentary bend. Here's a cool little lick using both bends. For this, I'm going to switch the high velocity articulation back to hammer-ons, and I'm going to use just key switches for the bends. Again, slower. I'm hitting the upslide key switch, playing the third, or B, releasing the key switch, Then I'm playing a sustained fifth, or D. Then I hit the momentary bend key switch, hit the second, which is A, release the key switch, and then play a G and E. A little faster. Now I'm going to hold the harmony key switch while I play the same thing. Here's a variation of that lick using an up slide and an up trill instead. You've probably noticed that we've had the mutes over here in the low velocity range. This is a kind of standard going back to the old hardware romplers, and it's great if you're playing runs and you just play some notes lighter for the mutes. While we're on mutes, let me show you a hidden Renegade acoustic feature. You may have noticed that there isn't an articulation control for harmonics. Well, harmonics are there, but they're hidden in the high velocity range of the mutes articulation. So you can access them with the mutes key switch, or set the high velocity range for mutes, and when you play harder, you get harmonics. Let's talk a bit about playing leads or melodic fills. I'm putting the high velocity articulation back to Hammer-On. Even if you don't have great keyboard skills, you can use a trick or two to get a decent track. To start, use a pentatonic scale. It's just the same 5 notes repeating every octave. The notes are 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. So in G, they are G, A, B, D, and E. So you can just move around up and down with these notes. Use the 1, 3, and 5 as the landing notes, or longer notes, with shorter notes in between. Now hold down the harmony key switch and do the same thing. Then trigger some hammer-ons using key velocity. And let's add some auto vibrato. When you've got that down, play the minor third or B flat once in a while. Sometimes you'll find that a minor pentatonic scale will work better depending on the piece. In that case, your notes are 1, minor third, 4th, 5th, and minor 7th. Okay, going back to major, let's throw some articulations in the mix. Well, I hope you found this useful. If you're interested in Renegade Acoustic, please head over to Indiginus.com to check it out. Thank you.